Please welcome back to the stage Chris James and special guest Jeff Wilke.
Thank you so much. Well, I have the honor to be with someone really cool today. Jeff Wilke. We'll be asking Jeff some questions, but I'm really excited to have you here. Have a seat, Jeff.
Good to be here, Chris.
So, Jeff, you've had a long career in business, and we've talked about some of the incredible things that you've done. Now, I don't know if the audience knows some of those things that you've done on your personal journey. Jeff used to work for a little company, Amazon. When he started, the growth under Jeff's leadership was pretty amazing. And we're going to start it with simple. My simple question is, what does it take to go from a $2 billion a year company to a revenue of $2 billion a day? How do you take a company like that under your leadership?
It's pretty straightforward, Chris. No. Thanks for being here. First of all, thanks for welcoming me, Chris. It's a real honor to be with you all. So there are a couple of things that I think prove to be important for us in the growth of Amazon, and this is true for probably a lot of companies. First is to have a great customer experience in a huge market. So retail is a giant market. It's really helpful to have no limit to growth that comes from the available customers. It comes from whether you can execute or not. And on execution, we learned to build process improvement into everything. So we borrowed ideas from all kinds of industries. We borrowed from the car industry with the Toyota production system and Lean. We borrowed from people who were working on statistical process control, and we borrowed from people implementing computer science. In fact, a lot of the improvements that we made stuck because we encoded them in software, and that allowed us to spread those ideas and improvements around the world. We made sure that we had a great employee experience, which I think is critical. We made sure we built a culture that was inventive. One of the things that you have to do if you're going to remain successful over decades is continue to reinvent yourself as a business. It's very hard to build a business today and keep it the same as it was the day you launch it and assume it's going to be, very important or continue to grow over the course of a couple of decades. We had to make sure we designed an organization that wouldn't collapse under its own weight. So many of the folks in the room are running small businesses, and you're not going to have this problem, but there's a point in growth where the size of the organization can actually be an impediment to continue to grow. And we had to figure out ways to organize so that wouldn't happen. And then the last thing is, think very long term. Now, in American business, long term is often a couple of quarters. It's not 7 generations. But I think we were able to think a little longer term than many, and that helped us a ton.
There's a lot of businesses in this room, and they're in various stages of development. Some of our businesses are tribally owned companies. Yeah. Some of them are entrepreneurs. So my biggest question, sometimes like you just mentioned, it takes a lot to get to scale, and it's really overwhelming to get a business into the markets and help that business grow. What are some of the biggest points of advice or your wisdom that you've gathered that you could give to some of those businesses in the room?
Well, I'd say the first thing is if you're early, iterate, continue to refine the product that you're selling way beyond where you might be comfortable stopping. It's one of the things that I learned personally by being involved with Amazon is that there's a degree of iteration in getting a product right that is really hard to do. And your temptation along the way is to say, it's good enough, we'll just launch it now. Or the way we're serving customers is good enough, we can keep going. And often it isn't. A technique that we used to get really good at this was to try to write the story that we'd tell the world, a press release, a blog post, could be a TikTok video these days, but the story that you want to tell the world on the day of launch of your product, and work backward from that story and keep iterating the story until you read the story one day. And what will happen usually is you read the story in the afternoon, you're like, it's okay. And then you go to sleep and you wake up and you have all these ideas for how to improve it. But one day you'll wake up and you'll say, wow, that was so good. It actually made my dreams better. And when you have a product that's that tight, then you can go and go big with it. I would say make sure you have a great team. This is obvious, but when you have a small number of people, every hire matters. And you want to hire people who are really devoted to the purpose that you've set up for the company. And then last thing, I speak to a lot of leaders in all kinds of different industries and doing all kinds of different things in the world. And I try to remind them that there is no one perfect leadership style. The most important thing to do in leadership of a company, of a nonprofit, of government, is to be yourself, be authentic. There are infinite number of ways to lead, but the way that's going to work best for you is be who you are, because people can see if you're faking it.
I think that's great advice. I'm thinking in my head, I wish I just had a pen, so I'm glad this is going to be recorded so we can write down this great information. The list of projects you were involved with at Amazon is amazing. I mean, these are all household names. Amazon Prime, Amazon Video, Prime Day, and acquisition of Whole Foods, all under your leadership. Is there one project that sticks out in your mind that you're really proud of?
Well, this one's a little nerdy. Okay, so anybody in the audience doing any kind of business with logistics, with moving things around? Okay, we've got a couple. All right, so if you've been to the Amazon website and you've seen this phrasing that says, want it delivered someday, tomorrow, order in the next 3 hours and 42 minutes, have you seen that kind of thing? Okay, that didn't exist in 1999 when I joined. And the reason it didn't exist is we could not make a precise enough prediction of when the item would arrive at your house in order to make that precise a promise. And the way that we switched everything around in order to make that kind of promise was to implement something that we called Fast Track. And what we did was take a warehouse process that took about 18 hours to get something from shelf onto a truck down to about an hour and a half. And we started to be able to then process orders as they came in. We completely changed the software. So one of the most important things for us to do in this sort of transformation was to actually, every time we improved something, we encoded that improvement in the software that ran the buildings so that we were able to leverage that improvement across every building. So I had teams of computer scientists that were alongside the business people that were helping me to design this. And when we were done, we had an incredibly reliable promise that we could make. And then we decided to figure out what to do with it. So we built the capability first because we just wanted to get faster in the warehouse and more reliable, and realized we had something that nobody else had. And a very clever group of people said, hey, why don't we offer a subscription to this thing? And we could call it Prime. So Prime is actually a subscription to operational excellence that was encoded by software engineers into software. And it became obviously a really important part of Amazon's growth.
It's amazing. How, as a leader, how did you prepare to mentally to do those things? Because when you're looking at huge initiatives like that, I mean, what is your sort of secret sauce in preparing yourself to be a leader?
Well, I mean, for me, this goes back to what I said before. I think the secret sauce for any effective leader is authenticity. So the authentic me, I grew up in Pittsburgh in the 70s when the steel mills were closing, and we would drive by these old mills, really giant, rusting, steel plants, and I was fascinated by the process. Like, how does iron get turned into steel and then end up in sheet or tubing or whatever it is? And that's probably why I ended up being a chemical engineer. That's a process-focused engineering discipline. And then I was also writing a lot of software, so I tried my hand after college at being a programmer. And programming is all about process. You have to do something, so you create the steps in the sequence, and then sometimes you branch, that's if-then, sometimes you have recursion, but it's very process focused. And then I ended up in manufacturing, and that's all process. And then Amazon for 22 years, which was very process intensive. So along the way, I think what I was doing was kind of building a playbook for how you improve businesses by getting better at process, but not doing it so rigidly that you take away the joy of writing your story. I mean, I think that's one of the key things. It's easy to get trapped into believing that the way you optimize a business is just to focus on, process and math and, stuff that is fun for some of us, but it's not the story of the business that's going to resonate with customers. And that was the part, I think, for me that I always would come back to is what's the story in this process that we're improving? Sort of the thread that's tied through all the things I've done.
We've talked about a lot with Amazon, but now you have another leading role now. Let's talk about what you're doing today. I want to talk about your build manufacturing as well as some of your philanthropic work. So we'll start. This is a two-part question, very long question.
By the way, this is like if you become a public company and you're with investors, this is what they do. They give you like a 4-part question. You have to like memorize all 4 parts.
Yes, you get a 4. What you don't see, audience, is I do have cards and I have a screen, so I know the question. But so Jeff doesn't get his answers on the screen. Your work with coding, computer science, and particularly in our underserved communities is what led you to being here at Res today, and we really appreciate you being here and taking your time. You credit your knowledge to these fields of being central to the success of a business leader, as you've sort of talked about. Can you explain and expand on why should people who aren't necessarily planning to be in computer science or an engineer still have some basic understanding of code and technology?
Well, so can I do the first question?
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
I'll just tell you a little bit about what I'm doing now.
Please.
And then I've been, probably because growing up in Pittsburgh, I've been fascinated with manufacturing my whole life. And I believe that the strength of a society depends critically on its economy, and that one of the industries that's most important for creating great jobs and for ensuring that less valuable inputs are transformed into more valuable outputs is manufacturing. And I think societies that don't have this capability become beholden to those who do. So manufacturing, in my view, is kind of critical to building a broad society. And so I decided after I left Amazon to work with some classmates from grad school to build a new manufacturing company. We call it Rebuild Manufacturing. And the goal is to recreate some of the engineering and productive capacity that we have offshored over the last, we being sort of North America, have offshored over the last 30 years and bring it back to the US so that we can produce complex things without having to find subcontractors and component manufacturers that aren't on our soil. And these are things like all the complex things that you see, cars, planes, power plants, these all need lots of people to come together to do the engineering work and the production work. And too often we've moved that work offshore in the last 3 decades. I want to try to have our company be one example of how you can invest for our future to bring it back here onto our shore. And then my wife's in the audience, Liesl. Will you wave? So we do our philanthropy together, and one of the most important things we do is focus on education. We think that education is the most important way for us to create equal opportunity for everybody, and it has to be lifelong education. So one of the things I think we'll talk about in the rest of our conversation is the important role that tribal colleges play, and this program that we're funding, which is to increase the capability of the colleges to teach computer science. So this goes into the second question that you asked, which is technology. Why is it so critical?
So as you just mentioned, tribal colleges and universities play such a critical role of educating our future generations, engineers, coders, and of course our business leaders. you've made this investment into our community. So talk a little bit about the investment and what was behind, what is the investment, and talk about what was sort of behind that motivation.
Sure. Well, the first thing is technology, so software especially, is becoming embedded in almost everything that we use, right? And this is pretty obvious, but I'll do this just for fun to get us moving a little bit in the morning. So does anybody have a smartphone in the room? Okay. Does anybody drive a car or has ridden in a car that might have a computer chip in it? Have you used YouTube to learn something that you didn't know before? Okay. Have you used Zoom or Teams or something else to communicate with a loved one? I mean, this is all software that's embedded in things that we have started to use every single day. And you could decide, I don't actually want to know how that stuff works. I just want to use it because it seems to work. But I'd argue that if you take that stance, you're beholden to the people that try to sell you whatever new technology comes along without having any way to evaluate whether it's useful for you, your business, or your community. So one of the things that Liesl and I have talked about a lot over the last few years is how do we help communities that have not typically had a strong investment in software development and computer science and technology to prepare themselves for this world where, imagine you're a tribal elder and you're trying to figure out how to protect the data related to the population in the community and the businesses in the community. What if you're a K through 12 administrator that's trying to figure out what curricula to put together for the kids so they're prepared for jobs of the future? What if you're a farmer who's competing against people that have satellite images of crops and are using AI to figure out how to water and feed the crops? Like, if you're in these kinds of positions and you don't have an understanding of computer science and technology in some level, or you don't have someone you can turn to talk about it, I think you're at risk of falling further and further behind. So what we're trying to do with the tribal colleges, first of all, I'm a huge fan. As you know, there are 35 tribal colleges that are chartered by Native communities. And I love that, first of all, because that's independence, self-determination. You know, they're not part of accreditation by somebody else. It's the tribe that determines that this charter matters. The students are amazing. Liesl and I have visited a couple of schools so far. We have a few more to go that are part of the current pilot program. And the students are smart, they're engaged, they find really clever ways to integrate art and story and technology. And I think in ways that are really valuable for the world. Yeah. And part of why we're doing this, and this is trying to ensure that there's a computer science teacher in every one of the 35 tribal colleges. I want to hear a round of applause for that. There are 4 colleges right now that we're supporting. IAIA, Navajo Tech, Bay Mills. Oh wait, I should pause. Yeah, and Salish Kootenai. And we've had a chance to see just the beginning of what happens. And it's everything we were talking about a moment ago, where the elders now have access to someone who is either Native themselves or deeply devoted to Native community, who's right there in the community, and they can ask if they're being sold something by the outside world to protect the cybersecurity of the tribe or the data or whatever. They can go to the professor and say, should we buy this? There are K through 12 teachers who aren't computer scientists or math teachers, or trying to help kids in high school to learn skills that are going to be useful to them later. And who are they going to turn to if there's not an expert in their community? Well, if there's a professor of computer science, there's an expert in the community, and the K through 12 folks can turn to them. And anyone else who wants to learn about these technologies and where they're headed has someone who's a trusted friend, nearby, part of the community that they can go to. So wrapping all of those things together, we just think that one of the best ways to help society broadly, because my secret goal, maybe it's not so secret now, would be that the way that all of the people that we've met who have such an amazing ability to integrate technology and history and culture and art and story, find a way to teach the rest of us how to live for today and tomorrow, which I think we've drifted too far away from.
Yeah. You know, what really qualifies our tribal colleges is just that they're really preparing our next generation of Native leaders. And so we really appreciate your support on that. So that leads me into a question about what's important for you that our future generations of coders and engineers, or even leaders, you can say, looks like. You know, it's very important that what that looks like. And in case of Indian country, why do they reflect the values and traditions of our community? You've mentioned some of that, but tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, why should this investment go in to help support future generations?
Well, I have a basic belief, which is that every person has superpowers, at least one superpower, everybody. And society just isn't as full as it could be if we don't allow every superpower to be discovered and to flourish. What I believe is that this combination that we're headed toward, and I think we're all seeing us barreling toward this future state where we have amazing humans and really enabling technology. Now, that enabling technology could be scary too. I mean, that's one of if you've been following the ChatGPT stuff over the last 4 months, maybe you've played around with it. If you haven't played around with it, I'd encourage you to do it, including see how whether the technology is trained on enough native history, for example, culture, language, because these capabilities over time will actually be really good at doing translation, for example, at preserving history, at making sure that when we're writing with the assistance of machines that we get the corpus of all human knowledge as part of it, all human knowledge, not just the human knowledge that came from the kind of European-centric history that we have. And I think the result of that, the result of humans with superpowers and machines, is going to be unbelievable capability to solve disease, to allow us to be well for much longer in our lives, to solve poverty, to solve hunger, to build communities that aren't as likely to go to war as the ones we have today. Now, that's an optimist point of view. It's very clear, I hope, that you can tell I'm an optimist. So I think this world of people and machines together can build a better world, but it's not necessarily going to build a better world. And it's going to need people that can look out 7 generations and understand whether or not the path we're on is going to be the right path, and have the judgment and the courage to intervene if it's not. And I would argue that, as Liesl and I have learned a lot about Native communities, and we have so much more to learn. You could look back in kind of history hundreds and thousands of years ago, and you could argue that tribes and nations did a great job of leveraging the superpowers of their members. So things that were on the order of that size, tribes and nations, actually, you might argue that the organizations that indigenous communities came up with might be the most effective that humans have ever invented. Mm-hmm. But we have a world now that is way bigger than one tribe or one nation. And I think the only way for us to accomplish the kinds of things that indigenous tribes and nations did for their communities is to take advantage of both human superpower and machines, which is why I'm so focused on making sure that the people who have the ability to see 7 generations out have access to the machine-based tools to ensure the rest of the world gets the benefit of that understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you have a session later on today, so do you want to just give just a brief teaser for what you're going to discuss on the session today?
Yeah, this is the panel.
The panel,
yeah,
yes.
We have, so I'm going to probably be fairly quiet, uncharacteristically versus your data from this discussion, but we have some members of the colleges who we've been working with on the computer science initiative. And we have a professor, we have a college president, and I want their story. I'm hoping that what happens is that we inspire the other 31 colleges and businesses and communities who are present to join us. And that's like the sort of secret mission. But there's so many powerful things that are happening as a result of having expertise inside the community. And I'm hoping that people who attend can hear it from directly from the folks who are engaged in this work. So Cheryl and I will probably be relatively quiet. Actually, Emily's going to do the moderating. We'll probably be quiet.
Wonderful. Well, make sure you guys check out that session. It's later on this afternoon. So my last question, and feel free to add on as much as you want for this question, but really, what's next for you? I know you have a lot going on. You've retired from Amazon. You have your company now, but what's next for you in the future?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball, first of all.
We all have one, so
okay.
We can share.
Please share. I mean, that's one of the things I'm hoping to learn by coming to Res. I have a mantra that I've used for a long time. I'm not sure I've ever shared it on stage, but it's live, love, learn, contribute, feel blessed. So these are words that I say to myself kind of every day. And I try to live my life and make choices that advance, me personally in some way along one of those attributes. And I hope in the process, when I eventually enter the spirit world, that I'll have helped improve the lives of my family, my close family, my friends, and maybe some small part of the world.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for being here. Jeff and I have had several conversations over the past couple of months, and I really appreciate your commitment to Indian country, your commitment to the tribal colleges and support for the College Fund. Let's give Jeff a round of applause. And I really thank you for spending some time here at Res. I know you're going to be here for most of the day, maybe some tomorrow as well. So
Liesel's an artist.
Okay.
She loves Native art.
Great.
So you might not ever get us out.
Yeah, you guys, you'll be packing us out as well. So thank you for both of you being here, and thank you so much for being here, and enjoy your time. And I look forward to hearing more of the story. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody.